Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm just going to let in a few more people. Sorry, just for a second there. There's a couple of slightly late joiners, but it's so nice to see you all here. My name is Paul, and I'm the education lead for the Ministry of Eco-Education. And this online session is going to be about an hour long, and ideally, my presentation part will be about half an hour and 45 minutes, and I'm going to talk through the journey of the Ministry of Eco-Education and explain what it's all about and all of the people along the way who've helped to make this come together. And then hopefully there'll be an opportunity towards the end for some discussion and to hear from some of the people on the call as well. So let me just get myself a little bit more sorted. Whilst I'm presenting, do feel free to add any questions you might have as you think of them into the chat. And I am recording this as well so that we can use this as a bit of a tool further down the line just to show other people. So to begin with them, there's a few comments there in the chat of people just saying that their internet means they might drop off, but fingers crossed. And I hope everyone who is on half term is appreciating their half term. And if you're not, you might well be looking after children who are on their half term. So conscious of that. So the Ministry of Eco-Education. The Ministry of Eco-Education is a charitable organisation that's about maybe 6 months now in its existence. And it was started, just before I get any further, I should introduce Dale Vince. And Dale Vince is the sort of initiator of this. He is owner of Ecotricity, but he also set up the Green Britain Foundation, which is a charitable foundation which has backs a number of projects, including Sea Shepherd UK and a variety of other educational projects. And also Dale is maybe known for being the owner of Forest Green Rovers, which is the greenest football club in the world. And so Dale has an interest in sustainability and has done throughout his life. And most recently, he has really wanted to get to grips with education. And there are a couple of other projects he's involved with, one around apprenticeships and skills training between 16 and 18. And this project is the more curriculum-based education schools focus. And so through conversations with a local primary school that Dale and Ecotricity had links with, of Minchin Hampton Academy, this is where the project began. And it was about a year, or probably even more than a year ago, that Nick Moss, the head teacher at Minchin Hampton Academy, had been beginning to think about an environmental curriculum. They had, all of the teachers had sat down together and had a real interest in this area and wanted to do something differently. And so they had themselves had started thinking about how they might be able to teach this in a more appropriate way and how they might to engage their students around these sorts of issues. And so they'd started to come up with ideas for a curriculum. They'd started to teach elements of this. And it was about 6 months ago that then I was brought on board to help evolve and develop lots of those ideas and take the initial thoughts of the Minchin Hampton staff and help foster them and build it eventually into something that was transferable. So Minchin Hampton Academy was the first school of the Ministry of Eco-Education, and now since September they have been running the curriculum in its entirety. So every year group is exploring elements of the curriculum, and we have a really good video that I'll share later on, which shows a visit that we did a couple of weeks ago of what is actually happening at the school, how the curriculum looks in practice, and what it's like in action. And we've also, I'll talk a bit more about how we've then used elements of their school community to help develop aspects. And this is one of them. So we spoke initially to the young people at the school, the primary children, and this video is a particularly powerful one. There's a whole variety of young children between the ages of about 6 and 11 who we discussed their ideas of the climate and nature emergency and what sustainability meant to them, and their emotional responses to nature and how they felt about the situation that the world was in. And they were really eloquent. They were particularly good at explaining their thoughts and opinions. And this video explains what the climate and nature emergency is. So these are sort of 6, 7, 8-year-olds explaining what this is. And it just shows how no one is too young. And hopefully everyone on the call agrees in that sense that we should give young people far more credit than we do. They're far more capable of comprehending these ideas. I know a lot of people talk about this concepts of fairness and care that young people seem to grasp very quickly, that actually we can build on that. And there's other ideas about how we structure society and how we relate to the rest of nature and how we interact with both other people, but other living things as well. Is a really important thing to begin with. And then I'm going to come back to these people. What I'm going to do is share with you a bit more about what the Ministry of Eco-Education is before I go too deep down the journey. So the Ministry of Eco-Education describes itself as a collaboration of teachers working together to place sustainability at the heart of education. And what we were very keen to do at the beginning was to develop a project that was from the ground up. So it involved teachers from day one, and it was about building on the practice and the knowledge and the interests of teachers themselves. And that's something that's been really important during this whole journey, is to continue to come back to and remind ourselves of what it means in practice, and to explore that in its practicalities. Also, in terms of that phrasing, we're keen, this is not just an eco-curriculum, this is not just about nature or what we might associate with sort of forest schools. This goes much, much deeper. This is about embedding sustainable ideas, concepts, knowledge, skills, all of these sorts of things across the entire curriculum. So again, what this is not is this is not about having an add-on of an eco or environmental curriculum. It's not part of the geography curriculum. It's not part of the science curriculum. It's about everything. And actually, what I should say as well at that point is that what we have done is we have rearranged the national curriculum. We've reframed it around an environmental lens. And so this is teaching the national curriculum. This is something that every single school can do right now. And I'll show you, actually, we've got 15 schools who are doing this right now. And the plan is in September 2022 to have at least 100 schools, and we're well on our way to sort of gaining that. But how this project differs to many of the other projects that exist maybe within this space is that we're not talking about changing from the top down. We're not waiting for the government to come up with some sort of curriculum review or to direct from the top down. Instead, this is something that teachers have the autonomy to do right now, from today, and it achieves both the national curriculum, but also achieves what we might prioritize around the environment and how we engage with the rest of the living world. So it's framed around big, broad inquiry questions, and that's also a key concept that I'll come on to later on. But the other thing I should say is that the way that this curriculum has been organized is that we have worked with more than 160 charities and organizations. So a fundamental part of this is that we are not creating resources, we are weaving together or stitching together the resources that already exist out there in the world. And most of these are available freely on the internet. And the way that the curriculum works is that there are big, broad inquiry questions that frame the learning, frame a series of around 8 lessons, but there's flexibility for that to be shorter or longer. And the idea is, from lesson to lesson, or even within a lesson, there are resources from different charities and organizations that come together. And what it creates is a far more cohesive and holistic curriculum, exploring these sorts of environmental ideas. The other thing as well is maybe to say that this is at the moment framed towards Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, but there are ambitions in the future for this to most certainly be aimed then at Key Stage 3, and then to explore ideas of how it might engage with other aspects of schooling beyond those sorts of framings. So here we are a little bit more. here shows you that these are some of the key principles that underpin the curriculum. Now, there is the process of inquiry and the idea of learning through discovery and experience, and that's particularly led by ideas from Margaret Roberts, in terms of how you might frame the learning process and exploring in that sense. And then that leads on to this idea of adventure. And this is adventure beyond the idea of going outside and climbing a tree. This is about adventure in your everyday and adventure in the classroom, being adventurous in the way that you explore knowledge and explore the world. We've also pulled quite heavily from Alistair Humphrey's ideas of micro adventures and the living adventurously in that sense. And then the number 3 there is about balance and that relationship between humans and the rest of nature. And what these materials do is that it reframes the way that we think about nature as something to exploit, but instead align ourselves quite closely to that. And all of the materials and the language that's used really reinforces that. And then the 4th one, systems thinking. Instead of compartmentalizing this sort of knowledge or these ideas, instead it's about pulling them together in these big, broad inquiry questions that actually bring together bits of science, maths, history, geography, English, all of these things in a way that's very loose. And also, though, just when you explore the world, thinking about how the world is connected as well. So as well as the curriculum knowledge, but also ideas of how the world is structured. There's also a heavy emphasis on developing human agency and empowering young people. That's something that's come through very strongly from both parents, teachers and students themselves, wanting a curriculum where actually they're encouraged to engage with the rest of society and to realize their own human agency. And lots of the materials do that. Now, I am now going to jump back to, let's have a look at the presentation that I was just looking at. And actually, I'm just going to tell you a bit more about the journey. So I said that sort of day 1, about a year ago, was at Minchinhampton with their students and staff. Since then, particularly last summer, there was a lot of face-to-face visiting, lots of online video calls, to work closely with the teachers to help develop their materials, to trial some of this, and then have the bones of something that then other schools could get on board with. And then since this September, we've had, here's a handful of them, but we've got 15 schools across the country, including, we've got Hannah in Dewsbury, we've got Tamsin down in Plymouth, Debbie in Bradford, we've got John in Liverpool. And this is a real handful here because what we've got are more than 15 extremely passionate, enthusiastic environmental educators who are helping to feed the curriculum. So they are trialing, but they're also feeding back. And that's that whole sense of collaboration. So rather than dictating how something should be done, instead we're saying, here's some ideas. We have taken out some of the hard work or done some of the legwork in one sense, that we've pulled together these resources, we've framed them in one way, have a go, see if they work for you. And that what we've been doing over the last few months, and we're going to continue doing for the rest of the year, is continue to have a cycle of feedback where teachers are trialing these materials and feeding back their ideas. I mean, the other thing I should say as well is we're really keen to share best practice, build on what schools are already doing. So all of these educators have shared with us ideas they already have, things that they already do on the day-to-day. And what we're doing is building those into what we're doing and helping amplify them across different schools across the country. And that's also a key part of what we're trying to do with these 160 and more organizations. And hopefully there's people on this call who are really keen and realize that they have resources and there's potential for collaboration as well. Is we want to help amplify all of the great things that are already going on around the country and signpost these, because we fully appreciate that what happens and works in one school is not suitable for another in another situation, and there needs to be flexibility and adaptability. And that's at the heart of what we're doing as well, is providing almost options and ideas for educators that they can then develop themselves. Now, what we have done is we've created a sort of process for schools to come on board, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a second. But what I wanted to do was just take a step back and explain a bit more about the journey that we've gone on over the last year between Minchinhampton as the first school and then coming to these 15 schools with something of more, a bit more holistic. So one thing that we have done is we very early on canvassed academics, teachers, students, all kinds of stakeholders, parents, governors, and actually you can see here a breakdown of some of the initial research we did. We had around 20% parents, 20% academics, and about 60% teachers who came back. And this was, we did some online surveying, but we also did some kind of chaired conversations, and we did some more kind of intimate one-to-one conversations. And what we were keen to do was to develop what kind of education do we need now? What should this look like? And we pulled together the research of a whole variety of people exploring what they thought the aim of school should be, as well as looking at what schools would be better if, so looking at what potentially schools could get better at or what should be removed. It was interesting that assessment played a really kind of intense, heavy role on this as well. And imagine if you could swipe the slate clean and start again, I would, what would you do? And there's all kinds of really interesting ideas that then we use to feed into the curriculum. The next step then, after some of this initial research, was then to explore what the current eco-education landscape looks like. What I should say is all of the reports I'm showing you at the moment are freely available through our website, and that's something we're really keen to do, is everything that we produce is freely available, and we're kind of more than happy to share everything, partly because we would love feedback as well. So this is a summary. And of course, there's always going to be things missed out. So please do point out if there's things you think are missing when you look at this after this call. But this explains some of the environmental education frameworks that currently exist around the world. So there's a bit of a summary of what currently exists and in what format and what organizations exist as a kind of baseline, almost like a starting point. And then what this document goes on to do is then to explore within the primary curriculum in the UK, what's the scale of it, how many people are there, how many students, how many schools, and then to think, what is the environmental provision within the national curriculum? How comprehensive or kind of sparing and missing is it? What does it look like though? What's the sort of, what's compulsory and optional? Where do ideas of climate change and the climate and nature emergency fit? Is that language present? There is no mention to climate change or the climate and nature emergency in the Key Stage 1 and 2 national curriculum, but of course that doesn't mean that teachers cannot include it, and that's what we're saying, is that there's the potential to achieve the national curriculum and to achieve all of these other environmental aims today. And that's exactly what we're sort of promoting and engaging and enabling with this curriculum. We've looked a little bit at teacher training and what provision in terms of the climate and nature emergency exists in education around that, because also we appreciate that staff training and understanding is really important. And then what we did is we looked at environmental education organisations and charities across the UK, and then put them under a number of umbrellas. So they're the big broadening initiatives like Eco Schools, which is superbly successful in terms of the reach and the number of schools engaged. And there's so much potential for this sort of project, the Ministry of Eco Education, to support, engage, embed and enable so much of that Eco Schools kind of provision. And then we went much deeper in terms of conservation and gardening and trees and all sorts of umbrella terms. But the idea was to gauge which organisation charities were having the largest impact, which ones had the most resources that we could then begin to draw from, because the next stage was to put those together into a database. And what we have is we have compiled nearly 1,000 resources from all kinds of organizations. And this was very much the starting point for the curriculum. It was to say what already exists out there, and then to think, how can we weave those ideas together? So how can we weave this together into something that's more holistic, a little bit more meaningful in a sense, because it takes students through a journey rather than dipping into one single resource. What we found through lots of our research is that a lot of the environmental or eco provision at the moment is around the fringes. It happens for a very few number of students at a periphery of the school day, and even physically it often happens in a corner of the school, and it's not the heart, it's not the center of the school. And what we're saying is that we need sustainability at the heart of the curriculum, at the heart of the school physically, and we also need it for every student and in every lesson. And that's exactly what this curriculum achieves. So having then explored the resources and what kinds of materials already existed, we then looked to build a foundation. So we wanted to make sure that what we were coming up with had an academic foundation and had a theory behind it, so that it was taken seriously by teachers. It's important that this was, there were reasons why we'd made the decisions we had. And so this document, Foundations for an Eco-Curriculum, begins with the setting of the situation of COVID-19 and the opportunity that that provided for governments to actually reset education. And we as an organisation were a little disheartened actually at how little creativity and innovation beyond, I appreciate moving online, but actually, you know, imagine if schools had turned around and said, we're going to pause our traditional curriculum and we're going to use this as an opportunity to explore something completely different before we come back after what's happened. And what we're also saying to a lot of educators at the moment, and schools are really interested in this, is to say, this is something that schools can focus their attention on beyond COVID-19. So it's actually something of far greater importance, far longer term kind of impact. And actually it's somewhere where they can focus their energy that is not talking about catch up or lost learning, but instead it does maybe achieve those things because we are investing more energy into the education system in that sense, but we're not explicitly using those terms that are often seen as slightly more negative. But what this document does, David, sorry, is it gives that foundation of the climate and ecological emergency, sets that foundation, says why we need a curriculum like this. It reinforces the idea of climate justice and social justice as being really, really interlinked and important. And then also looks at ideas of nature, because again, I think there are lots of other initiatives who are also exploring this, but it's important that our relationship with nature is a foundation to this as well, and that's put front and center. And actually one of the key parts of the curriculum initially as well was conversations with Miles Richardson at the University of Derby around his research of nature connectedness. And we can fully understand how being more connected, having a deeper relationship with the rest of nature is so important to our own health and well-being, but also the health and well-being of the planet. We also have ideas of community as well embedded within the foundations of the curriculum as well, because we think at the heart of sustainability is putting a school right at the center of its community, something that maybe was more of a norm in the past, something that has disappeared. And of course, it does still exist in some pockets, but it's something that needs to be at the heart of how we move forward into the future. And a lot of this is based around Rob Hopkins' ideas, and particularly around the transition towns movement as well. But focusing on that concept of community, a school being the heart of that, both physically but also mentally, in the idea that it draws in people from the local community to share skills and knowledge, and also students then go out into the community and do the reverse. I've talked about adventure and living adventurously and the micro adventures idea, so that's the other kind of underpinning of that. And then, so we had our kind of foundation, we had our ideas. Where we then went with this is we came up with a lot of inquiry questions. And you can see here a handful of them. And the purpose of these inquiry questions were that they were provocative, they were eye-catching, they were short, sharp, and they focused on things that society perceives as being important within the current landscape. So is carbon a magic ingredient? What is really renewable? Does it matter if species go extinct? How important is soil? And I'll show you a few of these in a bit more detail. Lots of these were developed through conversations with the primary students at Minchinhampton Academy, and also the teachers and parents within their school community. So let's have a quick look then at, I'll jump into one of them. Let's have a look at this one. It's called Where Have All the Trees Gone? And what this also does is shows you the structure of the curriculum, resources, sorry, the planning in that sense. So these schemes of learning are about 8 lessons long. They have a big, broad title or question that leads them, but they also within them have a key text. So there's literature embedded within this. And the idea is that's either something for the teacher to read themselves that gives them a bit more knowledge and understanding. It might be something that's then used as it's used that extracts are pulled from in terms of the learning within the classroom, or it's something that students read themselves. What this shows also is how each of them are linked to the national curriculum, and they will show explicitly kind of the links in that sense. The other thing I should say is as I said before, this isn't complete, it's not finished, and we want a reciprocal kind of collaboration. We want this to be a shared development, and so this is the sort of skeleton or bones or the beginnings of this, and teachers are helping to feed into this and to develop this as well. The other thing I wanted to highlight was the main assessment as well, or the outcomes. So each of these inquiry questions has an assessment linked to it, and lots of those are particularly real world in their outcomes. So the idea is the audience is maybe the parents or the local community, or it's a local business or local councillors, but there is an audience beyond just the teacher themselves. And also they are far more collaborative in their nature, but also a bit more performative. So lots of it's either drama based or producing something that is oral or written as well. We have a set of key ideas that really outlines to the teacher what are the fundamentals of this. And then you can start to see here. So the first one is how many trees are there? And the idea is that you start the lesson by heading outside. That's a key component of a lot of this learning as well, is normalizing the idea of taking students outside for a very short window of the lesson, coming back inside, going back out. Exploring some of the trees around the school grounds, or ones that you can see within sight of the school grounds. And here you can see how there is a selection of resources. So the idea is there's a curated list of different resources from a variety of organizations, and then it's up to the teacher to be able to pick and choose which ones they think might be appropriate for their class, depending on time and ability and all those sorts of things. So that gives you a bit of flavor of that one. We've got, does it matter if species go extinct? What does extinct mean? What species have gone extinct in the UK? And then thinking about maybe bees as a focus. This one is how important is soil? And again, drawing on lots of resources that already exist from the RHS in particular. Soil Voices is another really innovative organization as well. And what we're keen to do is embed more and more from you know, whatever teachers and educators feel appropriate, so that there's a real choice of resources in there as well. This one is, should we all go vegan? Exploring what it really means to be vegan, going beyond food, thinking about veganism as a lifestyle choice. And there's a whole variety of resources. Some of these linked to Forest Green Rovers. Obviously, many of the players there are vegan, and the food provided there is also vegan. Asking kind of what if questions as well, key component of this. And then, okay, so there's a few, and maybe we could talk about some of those in a minute. A few of the schemes of learning. What I then wanted to show you was this journey of how we then almost onboard schools and process them so that they kind of understand, because I think initially this can come across as particularly overwhelming. And what we're really keen to do is to help and support teachers. And that's something we're doing really closely with the 15 schools who are our pioneer schools. We really want to make sure that it's a success for them, they feel happy, and that actually it's an opportunity for them to grow. So the first step is canvassing the the school community, including the students, teachers, parents, all of the different stakeholders. And here are some of the resources. So with each step, there's a whole variety of different resources available. There is some information for the school community that explains what the curriculum is about, what's the reason to join it, and what it would kind of enable for the school. There's also a whole series of surveys. So there's a staff survey, which explores teachers' attitudes towards the climate and nature emergency, how confident they feel about teaching it. There's another one that's all about nature connection. So there's the Nature Connection Index, which has been developed, which is a simple 5 statements that you score against, and they give you a final index of your connection with nature. There's also some questions for teachers to explore with their students. So it's a bit more of a curated, kind of guided exploration of how students feel about exploring nature and learning more about the climate and nature emergency, what their feelings and emotions are around that. And then the next step, so step 2, is all about then thinking of mapping the curriculum, exploring what school already does, looking for opportunities to connect and embed the resources from the Ministry of Eco-Education within what the school already does. So are there easy opportunities to develop and grow something that a school has already had or done before? And part of the reason to do that is it's an easy way for teachers to begin to build their confidence and for the school to connect with the programme. We then have thinking about mapping the physical school site or areas around the school. So it might be a woodland or open space near the school that the school has access to. Thinking about then how those can be used as opportunities within the curriculum. And then also looking at staff training opportunities. And we have a whole list of things to read, things to watch initially for teachers. We also then have a series of free courses, and then further down there's a list of things that do have a fee. But the idea is that having done the first step, schools can then think about what it is that they want to develop within their staff, or what do staff want to develop, and how do they connect with the opportunities available. So again, we're trying to amplify and share the opportunities that already exist through connecting it within one holistic curriculum. We're then looking further down the line at some sort of launch event, and a few weeks ago, we went and visited 5 of the pioneer schools, and we did this during the Great Big Green Week, led by the Climate Coalition. And during that, one of the schools, all the schools had assemblies, but one of them did a completely collapsed timetable where the students were all exploring elements of the Ministry of Eco-Education curriculum. And at the end of the day, parents were invited in. We were in a big field in an open space, and the students performed and shared the outcome of what they'd learned during the day, partly to kind of allow the parents to understand and explore what the curriculum was about as well. And that was a really excellent event in a sense. But it might be that we could help do some lessons for parents, so we could take parents through some of the lesson activities within the curriculum, or we could do something that updates the knowledge of parents as well, or we could do something engaging the whole community, some sort of fair, and we've got the resources to help kind of support the delivery of that and to enable those sorts of events. You then are looking at initial sort of trials, so it might be that a lead teacher starts to teach part of the curriculum and does that within one year group, and then we then build on that. So as much as the Minchin Hampton are doing this throughout the whole school and every single teacher, with the other pioneer schools, it's definitely a far more flexible process where teachers who feel more confident are engaging with this, and then it will be further down the line that it becomes more and more holistic and whole school. And then ultimately at sort of step 5, what we're looking for is teachers to use the framework that we've developed to then begin to connect the resources from these charities in creative and innovative ways, using their own inquiry questions and building their own almost topics that then ultimately get shared more broadly across the country. So there is this sort of sharing, collaborative, crowdsourcing element to all of this as well. The other thing then that I just wanted to signpost as well is that we have a YouTube channel that we have put a lot of video content on. So there are videos from our visit to Minchinhampton. We've got some of our pioneer schools that we went and visited, sort of summary videos from them. We also have more step-by-step videos, so explaining. We've got here step 2, we've got a video all about step 1, and then also we're going to have videos explaining every single scheme of learning that talks to teachers through each lesson, and it means that they can pick it up much quicker. So there's supporting material for the whole project that just means it's much easier for teachers to understand and get on board. And this is something that we're, again, keen to build as a resource, and to also help amplify and share the great educators and people who are already doing these sorts of things. So we're keen to go out and visit far more schools and to share video content of what people are doing. That's also a key component. Okay, I think that was pretty much everything. I'm just having a quick look at the website again. The website very much is the place to go if you're wanting to find out more. I am definitely keen to answer people's questions or discuss anything that people might have. And I appreciate, I'm just catching up on the chat there. There's quite a few people who were sharing, is that sharing resources? I'm going to put the, I put the website link in the chat so that anyone who wanted to look at that. I know that Emma was keen to share some of their resources. Yeah, I think also the key component of this as well is that schools within their local communities will have so many resources, organizations that they may not have heard of. And part of what we want to do is help schools connect with that more local element as well. So it might be, you know, the generic one might be thinking about their local wildlife trust or sort of national trust properties. But beyond that, there's always environmental education charities that exist within more localized areas. And that's something that we're keen to connect schools up with. Did anyone else, you should be able to come onto video if you had any questions. Otherwise, put them into the chat. I'm keen to hear more about maybe where people come from, people's reflections and thoughts. There's definitely the opportunity to discuss some of what I've just presented. Jonathan.
Hi, it looks really, really good. I think it answers a need, which is that there are lots and lots of resources available, but that schools don't have a time to make that into something coherent. So it's really exciting to see the kind of thought that you've put into how you underpin what's going on, but also the flexibility then that schools and teachers have got to make it work. So it's not a single package that people kind of buy in, have to roll out in a certain way. I'm really interested. I'm writing some resources about rewilding on a small scale in Devon, and I'm wondering whether you've got any examples of people kind of using your background thinking and, you know, like your kind of for adventure and those other priorities as a way of structuring new resources. Have you got anything that's sort of been written with your thinking already in mind? Do you see what I mean?
Yes. So prior to this project, I developed some teaching resources. So there was a climate breakdown series of lessons for secondary, but more recently, I developed some around access rights and land ownership. Yeah. That's something I can share with you, Jonathan. Yeah, that model some of the thinking and show the style of approach as well. Because I think fundamentally as well, what we're trying to do is also nudge teachers in terms of their pedagogy as well, so that we think about learning in a slightly different way, because partly that's where we think the world needs to be ultimately sustainable. We need to move away from sort of knowledge delivery. And I think this is something that primary has always done well. It's also that kind of cross-curricular nature as well, where teachers are far more comfortable teaching beyond very narrow subject disciplines, and that's something that comes across in the nature of the resources. But I will find the link quick, and I'll put that in the chat, Jonathan. These ones are the climate breakdown ones, and these are the land ownership ones. I think also initially, Jonathan, what you were saying there, I'm really glad that you said that, because that's the message we want to convey, that there's no need to reinvent the wheel, that there are so many great people already doing great things. And what we perceived to be the thing that was missing was something that connected it up, weaved it together, and actually enabled teachers to use them more freely. Because, you know, all the schools we've visited, we've met teachers who already do elements of this, but they do it in a lesson every so often, or they do it from an organization that they have some connection with. They know of Surfers Against Sewage, so they use some of their resources, but then they haven't heard of the Marine Conservation Society, and they haven't then actually looked to see how those resources link together. So yeah, we were hoping to have done some of that legwork for teachers.
I have a second question, but do you want to see if someone else has got one first?
Would you want to throw your question in, and then maybe if anyone has got...
Okay, so my second question is this: what you're suggesting in terms of inquiry or in terms of changes to pedagogy are kind of almost diametrically opposite to the direction that's being taken and sort of through Ofsted enforced, where the emphasis is on knowledge curriculum, where the DfE was saying we don't want to have inquiry based learning. And I'm just wondering what your tactical approach to that is. Are you hoping us, and what the feedback from schools are? Do schools feel like they're taking a risk in adopting this? Do they try and hide it under the radar? Are they proud of it? That kind of question.
All the schools that we're working with already teach in a very similar way, so this doesn't feel revolutionary to them. And I think ultimately there's adaptability. So even though at the extreme end it might come across as being really radical, that actually this is there's the opportunity to use this as a stepping stone, or to sort of enter into this. And actually what we've been saying is that a curriculum like this provides so much more of what Ofsted are looking for, in the sense of it has a real clear purpose in terms of the language of intent and implementation and all of that. You know, the documents that we have supporting the curriculum are exactly what Ofsted would love. And actually, there hasn't, so the feedback in that sense from schools is that it's similar to what they already do, and they want this, and that they're, in terms of Ofsted, there isn't a concern.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? It's David here. I'm sorry you can't see me.
Hi, David.
Well, yeah, I go along with what Jonathan was saying about it being you know, a very impressive setup at the moment. I think it does fill a big gap that's been there in terms of bringing all these things together, and also the philosophy of the pedagogy as well, bringing that together. In one area that I've been working on for some time, having been an ex-head teacher for more years than I care to remember, is that my work now centers upon the leadership for sustainability. And I think that in itself is a bit of a gap. So having run courses for school leaders to try and convince them of the merits of adopting sustainability as a central ethos of the school, I'm just about, although I'm plugging this in a way, I don't mean it to come over as a a blatant plug. I'm bringing out a book that's being published in February that's about leadership for sustainability, and it picks up on some of the things that you've been talking about, in that sustainability shouldn't be seen as a bolt-on. It should be seen as a central, as I said, a central ethos to the school. And what I've tried to do is to link that to better leadership, which is again what Ofsted is looking for. It's not looking for some very scaremongering scheme. It's looking for something that will resonate with school leaders in the conventional sense, but in effect, it is taking under the wire sustainability as a radical concept, even though it doesn't appear that way. But what I'm trying to also say is that to get certain head teachers, and a lot of head teachers who are very much on the tram lines of the accountability agenda for various reasons, performance-related pay amongst them, I think you need to try and convince, or we need to convince the ones who wouldn't naturally gravitate to this way of working. So what I've tried to do is to try and get to the hearts and minds of leaders and convince them through sort of converting their values, really, and then showing them how they can operate that as a practical notion of leadership in their schools. So,
Yeah.
so I think, as I've said, leadership for sustainability is another biggie, and it has the potential to commandeer people who wouldn't even look at this because they either haven't got the time or space, or think they haven't anyway, and they're sort of prisoners of the system. So I would offer my help in that area, because I think it's another area that would be useful.
It sounds perfect, because one of the things that we have we have definitely seen that there are schools who they think if this was important, the government would be telling them to do it, and the direction would be coming top down, and so they are less interested. And we realize that in order to scale this, one thing I haven't said is that we have ambitions for half of all primary schools to be doing this curriculum by 2025. So that's 10,000 schools, and the only way that's going to happen is it to become normalized and mainstreamed. And so what we're keen to do is not to come across as radical. And I know one of the things that we focused on for these first 15 schools is we thought we need to get really exciting, engaged educators to come on board to help to develop this and to really drive it within their schools. But in order to scale this, it's exactly what you're saying, David. It needs to come across in a way that it's just for everyone and that anyone can get on board. And now I know, Denise, you had your hand up. Do you want to come first? And then we've got Avril.
Hello.
Hi, Denise.
Yes, hi. I believe our children are not being told about the importance of the animals and the sea creatures early enough. So they would be interested in taking care of them and protecting the environment in the meantime. So I've been doing a series for them about a turtle that needs their protection.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just talking about it to see what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting. It's interesting that I think often a lot of early years teachers say children come to school with this sort of innate love and inquisitive nature, sort of desire to engage with nature, and that it's interesting maybe how the current schooling system narrows some of that, prioritizes other things over that connection with the rest of nature, and ultimately then by the time they reach secondary school, there's, I mean, it comes across in the research with Nature Connection and the idea that there's a teenager dip, that a lot of people return to this later on, and that what we need to do is kind of keep building on that from a very young age. So yeah, sorry, is this a book, Denise, you were saying?
Yes, I've done a series, and it includes plastic pollution and what we can do to stop our practices that we have now, how we can reuse more, reduce, and recycle more.
I definitely will have a look and see how we can embed it, because the more kind of children's books that can be part of this, I think is really, really important and a good way to connect. I'm just going to jump, before I go to Avril, with Lydia had some questions. She said that we have found that primary schools have more time to input more environmental and eco-education. Do you hope to work with secondary schools in the future, which find it harder to take on the initiative? This is exactly why we started at primary, is because we knew that there was a smaller gap, that it was easier to jump and to engage young sort of primary schools. But we definitely feel in order for this to be meaningful and have the longevity, it needs to go beyond primary, and moving to secondary is definitely something of a longer term plan. Question 2 was, would you like to work with youth services going forward, as there is a keen interest? Style of learning that you've talked through sounds a lot like youth work. Yeah, I think also what we're really interested in the longer term, the bigger picture, beyond the idea that there are a set number of resources, is actually to work on that, to think about schools as actually being that heart of the community where youth work and youth services is all kind of fluid, and that there's a looser sense of where learning happens and how it happens as well. And ultimately, I think that's how we might achieve sustainability. Do you hope to bring on more youth voices going forwards, co-creation of resources with young people? Yeah, it's part of it now. So all of the resources that we've been developing, young people have been involved, and that's primary children have been involved. And we've got young people who are part of this as well. One of the challenges is when you're working with young people, to then be able to platform them and kind of share them and their voices involves a fair bit of scaffolding and kind of support in order to make sure that they're, it's not as easy as just sort of pushing them to speak. So that's been part of the process as well. But we've been doing that, I guess, on more of a school-wide platform, so that where they feel comfortable. And also, I guess that's where eco groups comes in as well, as kind of more prominent voices that at the moment are part of that, but something that we are keen to embed across whole schools. Let's go to Avril.
Hi, sorry, you always forget to unmute yourself, don't you? I'm really interested in what you're doing. I actually work in initial teacher education. So I train primary teachers at Liverpool John Moores University, and we've got a really strong ethos of eco education and embedding sustainability across the whole of the curriculum. And we have a number of modules where our primary trainees can actually focus on it. So in our second year, we have a module that is all about sustainability, and our students work with local school children to deliver sessions all about this in a wide range of contexts. And I suppose what I would say is I'm happy to promote your materials with those students, because obviously that it's a new audience for you, isn't it, in terms of catching them from the bottom up as well, before they actually get into the profession and get weighed down by targets and all the other things they have to meet when they start teaching. But also, if you were ever interested in kind of promoting through us in any way, that would be really, we'd be quite happy to do that, because it's, as I said, a strong ethos on our programme. So, and I don't know whether you've considered trying to work with initial teacher educators, because if you get people who are just entering the profession, it's more likely to be a sustainable model anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So at the moment we're working with UE in Bristol, and also there's two other universities of initial teacher trainers that we're working with. But what we're keen to do is to build on that, and it would be great to have another conversation with yourself in terms of both involving new teachers in terms of the development of the resources, and kind of show to them that actually there's a lot of creativity and opportunity for teachers to craft what it is that they teach, and also, yeah, to, like you say, to sort of use them as a way to engage with more schools. I think what's also interesting as well is understanding the provision of support and education around the climate and ecological emergency for new teachers. It's certainly at the moment quite patchy. A lot of it is dependent upon teachers using their own initiative to find that sort of training. And I think it's really interesting that one of the responses we've had from the schools that we're working with at the moment are that there's often the sense that there's one expert in the school that almost has responsibility for everything, and the other teachers take a step back, and that they think that someone else has it covered. And I think in order for this to be truly sustainable, it needs to be a shared responsibility. It needs to be everyone who feels like teaching this is part of what they do. And I think there's a gap there as well to bridge, to find a way for everyone to feel like it's for them.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think one of the things that we've found quite interesting with our students, because even say, for example, in the science module that I teach with our third years, we've just done a session all about sustainability, and we've looked at all the practical action materials and eco schools as well, and how we can bring that into the science curriculum. And one of the questions one of the students had at the time was, are we allowed to teach this? Are we not kind of just being a bit political? And I said, it's not political at all. It's essential, because what our trainees don't realise is how much climate anxiety children have, and how they see things on social media, and they're not able to discern which is the truth, which isn't, and kind of try and work out through this huge amount of information that's being thrown at them constantly what the future of the world looks like. And quite a lot of young children are very worried about their future, and I think teachers have a role in that to help them to kind of make sense of it all, and just to see what they can do in their own small way to help improve that.
Yeah, and I think even you can think about it as just the language, so that as a teacher you help support the exploration and understanding of what some of the terminology means. And I think even primary school children can understand that, because otherwise they come across words that then, if they don't have the meaning of that leads to more uncertainty. And yeah, I think it's so important to just build on young people's agency and sense of ability to kind of affect the world. And you can start really small. So it could just be you know, a garden space, or, you know, a very small space, and then you can build ideas and attitudes within that small space that then can translate into, you know, you can build the spatial extent of that as well. There's so many ways that can be done.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? What I would say is that please do email me, and I am really particularly keen to have further conversations with people and to look for opportunities to build and develop this. And, you know, also it might be just connecting people with some of the schools that we're working with, or some of the other educators. Yes, so Michael has asked, is the meeting going to be available later? Yes, I've recorded all of this and it's going to go up onto our YouTube channel. Yeah, so maybe that question about, you're interested in how other primary schools have managed to fit the inquiry questions into the very busy timetables that we have. I mean, so when we go to visit schools initially and we explain what the project's about, we say, look, this isn't an add-on, this isn't a bolt-on, it's simply reframing what you already do. And so they're still teaching the same sort of knowledge and contents, but what they're doing is they're just mixing them up so that they teach it in a slightly different order. There's a really good example of this, actually, that we were talking about in a school that we went and visited in Gloucester last week. And it's, let me just share this with you. It's the topic called, Is Carbon a Magic Ingredient? And so what this does is it frames it around this idea of, look, carbon and carbon dioxide is particularly important in terms of something to understand. But actually ideas of the rock cycle as foundations are things that young primary school children already do. But what we've bolted in is, or added, sorry, I was saying this isn't a bolt-on, but there's the opportunity to do a deep time walk and to then look at the concept or the idea of geological timescales in a slightly different sense than maybe they will have in the past. You can do the same sort of thing with toilet rolls around the room. And then also looking at the concept of industrialization, but doing that, you know, almost as the thing after you've done, after looking at the rock cycle. So linking industrialization with kind of rocks and that physical element of it. So there's a kind of history focus here, whilst earlier on there's a science focus. And then the question after is then maybe who has all the carbon, and looking then at the equity of this. So yeah, fundamentally embedded within this curriculum is that idea of exploring these sorts of ideas slightly differently, and thinking about, yeah, decolonizing the curriculum, just making it appropriate for the age that we live in. But obviously, having said all of that, it's also very close to what teachers are already doing. So it's not something that's completely different in that sense. It's something that's achievable today. And that's something I wanted to reinforce as well, is that the point that we're making is teachers and schools can do what's needed right now. They don't need to wait for the government to change, because the pace of that, or the scale of that change, has been relatively slow at the moment. And ultimately what we want to do is show this as a model to the Department for Education to say, look, it's achievable and this is the way that it can be done. And I guess the other thing to say is that that's as part of a tapestry, a rich tapestry. So part of what we're trying to do is promote all of the, or lots of the organizations that are already working within this space, and help weave them together so that they make more sense for teachers. And what we wouldn't want to do is sort of to say that this is the only way to do it. What I would say is that you all are part of local communities, and what I would love is you might have grandchildren, children, friends. There might be a school in your local area. There might be schools you work with. Please do tell them about the project. We are particularly keen to get more and more schools on board and understanding about the project and to know. And the best way of doing that is probably sharing the website. So I wanted to say, if there's no more questions, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for listening and being part of this. And hopefully this is the start of you actually being part of the project more broadly as well. I'm hoping we can build on some of the relationships and links that have already been suggested. Please do email me. My email is paul@ministryofelco.org, and I've put it into the chat, and it can also be found on the website. So thank you so much. I'm going to end